A prominent Philippines journalist, Maria Ressa, has been arrested on fraud charges. Last month, Ms. Ressa, the executive editor of a news website, Rappler, was arrested over an alleged internet libel case.
Internationally acclaimed journalist and the subject of a new documentary, 1,000 Cuts, Maria Ressa, thank you for hopping on with Variety.
Thanks for having me, Audrey.
There is a lot going on with you, as we saw in the documentary, but also in the news, several cases against you, several government investigations by the Duterte regime, specifically with your cyber libel case, which you were convicted on in June. What's the status of that now?
We filed a motion for partial reconsideration. It was denied by the judge, Judge Montesa. We have now appealed it to the Court of Appeals. So, in context, this is in 2018, the Philippine government filed 11 cases and investigations, 11 against me and Rappler in about 14 months. So in about a year, we almost had a case a month, right? And then in 2019, that solidified into 8 arrest warrants. I had to post bail 8 times, and then still, despite that, in a 5-week period, roughly, I was arrested twice. I think the government wanted me to feel their power, so they detained me overnight, even though it's a bailable charge.
Yung inyong mga reporter, they will be allowed to criticize us, but you go to jail for your crime.
With your cyber libel case from June, you and a Rappler researcher, right, are facing up to 6 years in jail. How are you processing all of that?
It's anger inducing, so I had to learn anger management. But the other part of it is I feel like, what is this government afraid of? And press freedom, journalists have always been there as the fourth estate to hold power to account. It's not a chilling effect anymore. Good God, we're in Siberia already. The largest broadcaster in the Philippines has been shut down. That's unthinkable. And it couldn't have happened if we weren't in a lockdown during a pandemic. The way to deal with this is to swat away the Damocles sword and do our jobs. The more the government harasses me and Rappler and other journalists, the more I think we must be missing a story. What are we missing that they don't want us to find?
Campaign kay Pangulong Duterte. I entered the government helping with the information dissemination of different government agencies for social media.
We've seen facts and truth be upended, especially through social media. We in the US certainly are not strangers to that. So what do you think is the role of tech companies when it comes to preventing the spread of misinformation, disinformation?
What's the role of tech companies in killing democracy? Because it's almost like we've taken the sting out of it for them. Tech has enabled the rise of these populist authoritarian leaders globally. And what we are seeing all around the world is once they get power, they actually use the processes of democracy to cave it in from inside. That's certainly what we're seeing happening in the Philippines. You're seeing that happen in the United States, and the studies have been there, right? So I guess, what is the responsibility? It is everything. They have enabled this. The attacks against me online, the death threats, the rape threats, those were the easy ones 4 years ago. Now it is far more insidious because it is the inability of Facebook to define hate speech and to protect the frontliners, the journalists, the women who are attacked. Think about it. The foundation of democracy is for every citizen to make up their minds. But without any shared facts, if we don't have facts, we cannot make up our minds. We are insidiously manipulated. So what's happening in the social media platforms is that lies laced with anger and hate spread faster and further than facts. Without facts, we have no democracy.
The government created disinformation networks, so people have no idea what the truth is. I was getting an average of 90 hate messages per hour.
We don't even know whether we can trust the police to protect us.
Just because you're a journalist na ito, you're exempted from assassination.
Can we put this genie back into the bottle and then have a path forward for democracy to thrive?
A lot of it will depend on what social media platforms do. There's no other time that proves that information is power as now, because by changing the distribution of news, right? The world's largest distributor of news today is Facebook. In the Philippines, 100% of Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook. So Facebook is our internet. But their algorithms are selective. They don't actually just give you the facts. They're not passive. They choose. And what they choose inevitably are lies laced with anger and hate. This is emotional manipulation, right? So how do we deal with this? Well, there's now a dictator's playbook that really uses this. And it wasn't even in the Philippines. In 2014, look at the Ukraine, Crimea, and Russian disinformation. The Mueller report talks about the United States and how Americans were targeted. The end goal of these influence operations are to change the way people think and the way they act. It's a crumbling from within. It is to make you lose trust in anything. And if you lose trust, then the voice with the loudest megaphone wins. In your case, Trump. In my case, Duterte. Social media plays to the worst of human nature. There's a study that just came out. After 100 conversations, only 5% will change their minds. So this is, again, the impact of what Silicon Valley's choices have been for growth and money versus the impact on the manipulation of societies. They are building something that has the impact on each of us as people. Why should they not be accountable for that? That's the first step. The second step is, I think, for all of us to realize, this is for everyone living in a democracy, that every generation creates its democracy and every generation gets the democracy it deserves. Tim Snyder, the Yale professor, he wrote a book called On Tyranny. He said, don't voluntarily give up your rights. Use your rights or lose it. And that's part of what we're trying to do in the Philippines, right? Don't lose your freedoms.
Mr. President, is it important that people be afraid of you? Fear.
Yes.
One thing that really struck me too from watching 1,000 Cuts is you say this more than once, that the Philippines are your chosen home. And I wonder, because you are American and you partly grew up in America, in the US, do you ever look back and say, I should have stayed in the States?
The way I live today, it's like I have a disease, right? Some days I wake up, I feel really, really good. Other days I wake up and I feel really, really bad. And it's been 4 years of this. And I think, some days I go, I'm really happy to be exactly where I am today, because I feel like I've spent the better part of my career getting ready for this moment. I'm in my best shape. I'm ready for a marathon. And in that sense, I feel like, okay, if the government wants to attack a journalist, I'm okay being that journalist because I'm ready. And I think this is a moment that matters.
Maligaya kayong gawain nyo sa kapwa-tao ninyo yan araw-araw? Just because you have the power of, press freedom?
Do you think you will end up in jail?
Cumulatively, if you take these 8 arrest warrants and the cases behind them, the jail sentence, the maximum is almost 100 years. And I grappled with this, and it was really, when I met Amal Clooney was the first time I realized, holy cow, this is a reality. I know it can get worse, but I also think that not standing up against this is even worse than jail. I had the honor of giving the commencement speech at Princeton University for the class of 2020. And one of the 3 things I asked them to do is to embrace your fear. And when I was writing that, I was really thinking about this, because this is what I had to do in order to be optimistic. I embraced my fear. So whatever that thing you're most afraid of, you touch it, you hold it, and then you embrace it so that you rob it of its sting. For me, it's worked throughout my life because we are our own worst enemies. And the tactics of intimidation require using your own fears against you. So I refuse to let that happen. Whether it's in the United States or in the Philippines, these next few months will determine the state of our democracy. There's so much at stake for all of us. And if you don't use your rights, if you don't demand your rights, if you don't hold power to account, we will lose our democracy.